Beatrice could feel it before she could name it, the quiet shift in the house, the way the air changed when Alexander walked into a room. It started with small things. A missed good morning at the breakfast table. A glance that slid past her instead of landing where it used to. Dinners where conversation dried up like water left in the sun, leaving nothing but silence and the soft clink of silverware. She told herself he was busy. Deals, boards, the kind of things men like him built entire days around. She told herself this was temporary, a phase, that the man who defended her in rooms full of people eager to cut her down was still in there somewhere. But when she woke in the middle of the night to the soft click of his study door closing, the light spilling across the hallway like a secret, she knew. Something had broken. And she had no idea how to fix it. The next morning at breakfast, she tried. "Do you want coffee?" she asked, her voice soft. "No." His answer was clipped, eyes on his phone, the sharp line of his jaw set. "Alex," she tried again, fingers twisting together in her lap. Did I do something?" His eyes finally lifted, pale gray and cold. "Don't call me that." The words stung more than they should have. She started, but stopped when his gaze hardened, cutting her sentence in half. "Whatever this act is," he said, his voice low and sharp, "you can stop. You got what you wanted. The money. The name. You can drop the performance now." The coffee in her hand trembled, the ceramic warm against her skin, the words colder than anything she'd ever known. "I don't understand," she whispered. "No," he said, standing, buttoning his jacket with practiced precision. "I think you do." And then he was gone, the quiet hum of the car engine in the driveway the only sound left in his absence. Days turned into weeks. She tried to talk to him, to explain, to make him see the truth. That she had never cared about the money, that she had signed that damn contract to keep her mother from drowning in medical bills and to find a little peace in a life that had been nothing but survival. But every attempt was met with ice. A turn of his shoulder when she entered a room. A polite nod when she spoke, like she was just another person in the house. A man who had once been careful with her heart now handling it like something disposable. The whispers in the press didn't help. Every blog post, every headline, every carefully edited photo added another crack to the fragile thing she'd been holding together. And then, one evening, it all shattered. She had waited for him, dinner growing cold on the table, the house too quiet, her heart pounding in a rhythm of hope and dread. When he finally walked in, his tie loosened and his expression unreadable, she tried one last time. "Alex." He stopped, eyes flashing with something sharp and cruel. "Don't," he said. "Just don't." "Please," she begged, stepping forward. "Whatever you think, whatever someone's told you, it's not true. I never." His laugh was harsh, humorless. "Save it. You think I don't know what this was? From the beginning? You wanted out of your life, and I was the perfect ticket. Congratulations, Beatrice. You played the part well." Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You think I don't care about you? I think," he said, his voice like a blade, "that you got what you wanted. And now, we're done." Her heart cracked clean in two. "I don't want your money," she whispered. "I never did. I just wanted you to." But he turned away, his hand already reaching for the door. "Get your things," he said, his tone flat. "By tomorrow, I want you gone." She packed in silence. Every dress, every pair of heels, every piece of jewelry, all of it folded neatly into the suitcase she had arrived with. The robe she had once thought of as soft and comforting now felt like a stranger's skin. Elena found her in the hallway, her eyes kind but sad. "Are you sure?" the housekeeper asked softly. Beatrice forced a small, brittle smile. "It's his house," she said. "And I don't belong here." Elena hesitated, then pressed a small envelope into her hand. "For you," she said quietly. For the road. Inside was a note, written in Elena's careful script, for when you forget, even for a moment, that you are enough. The kindness undid her. By the time the car pulled up the next morning, her tears had dried, leaving only the hollow ache of a heart that had learned, painfully, what it meant to break. She didn't look back as the mansion disappeared in the rearview mirror. The city she chose was nothing like the one she'd left. No towering buildings, no flashing cameras, no whispers following her down the street. Just quiet neighborhoods, coffee shops where no one knew her name, and a small apartment with a view of the park that reminded her of simpler times. She found a job at a bookstore, quiet, steady work that filled her days and let her nights pass without the weight of silence pressing too hard. With the little money she had saved, she furnished the apartment with second-hand pieces and painted the walls a soft, calming shade of blue. It wasn't much. But it was hers. The calls started a month later. The first time, Beatrice didn't recognize the number. "Miss me, bestie?" Lisa's voice oozed through the line, sweet and venomous. Beatrice froze, her hand tightening around the phone. "What do you want?" "Oh, nothing," Lisa said with a laugh that wasn't really a laugh. "Just thought you'd want to know how well we're doing. Alex and I." He finally realized what a waste of time you were. "Poor thing, you must feel so small now. Living in that little box of an apartment. Working some nobody job. How sad." Beatrice hung up. But the calls kept coming. Sometimes Lisa would just breathe into the phone, a quiet reminder that she could still reach her. Sometimes she'd talk, soft and cruel, describing the dinners, the trips, the way Alexander's arm fit perfectly around her waist. Each call chipped away at the fragile peace Beatrice had been building. But she never let Lisa hear her cry. A year passed. Beatrice learned to fill her days with things that mattered, morning walks in the park, long evenings with books that made her feel less alone, quiet dinners where the silence didn't feel like punishment anymore. The pain dulled, softened into something she could carry without breaking under it. But some nights, when the world was too quiet, she still thought of him, of the man he'd been before the lies, before the cold, before he'd turned her love into something small and ugly. And she wondered if he ever thought of her. 6 months in, Beatrice had almost convinced herself she was okay. Not healed, heartbreak never left that neatly, but steady enough to breathe without feeling like her ribs were splintering. Her mornings had a rhythm now. Coffee from the shop downstairs, where the barista had stopped asking for her name because he already knew her order by heart. A quiet walk in the park, where the early sun pooled like honey on the benches and the world still felt soft. A paperback novel perched in her lap while she sat on her favorite bench, letting the quiet replace the noise in her head. Then work. The bookstore wasn't much, creaky floors, dusty shelves, a register that sometimes froze mid-transaction, but it was hers. The quiet hum of customers browsing, the smell of paper and ink, the tiny satisfaction of helping someone find the perfect story. It grounded her in a way that no mansion ever could. Evenings were simple. A second-hand couch. A blanket that smelled faintly of lavender. Dinner balanced on her lap while the city hummed quietly outside her window. There were still nights where the silence hurt, where the memories came creeping in like ghosts. But most nights, she was okay. She'd learned to live small, to live quiet, and there was a kind of peace in that. The first call came on a Tuesday night. Unknown number. Beatrice almost ignored it, thumb hovering over the decline button, until something, habit, maybe, made her answer. "Hello." Well, Lisa's voice purred, sharp and sugary all at once. "If it isn't my favorite runaway." Beatrice froze, the world narrowing to the venom laced in every word. "What do you want?" "Oh, don't be so cold," Lisa teased. "I just wanted to check in. See how life's treating you in that little box you call an apartment. Cute, isn't it? I bet it's cozy." Beatrice's grip tightened on the phone. "Why are you calling me, Lisa?" Because, darling, Lisa said with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes, you should hear it from me. Alex and I. We're perfect. Dinners at the terrace, private jets to Paris, parties where everyone knows my name. You remember the terrace, don't you? That place you looked so out of place in. Click. Beatrice hung up before Lisa could say another word. But the calls didn't stop. Sometimes Lisa would talk, her voice soft and cruel. She'd describe dinners under glittering chandeliers, the way Alex's hand rested at the small of her back, how the world looked at her now, polished, envied, untouchable. Other times, she wouldn't say a word. Just a long, quiet breath. In. Out. A reminder that she could still reach Beatrice, that she could still worm her way into the fragile peace she'd built. The worst were the nights Lisa chose to laugh. Low, mocking laughs that seemed to curl around Beatrice like smoke. Do you miss him? Lisa had asked once, voice dripping with sarcasm. Do you still sit by the window waiting for him to come back? Oh, sweetheart, that's not happening. Not ever. Beatrice never cried while the line was open. She refused to give Lisa that power. But when the phone finally went silent, when the weight of the call pressed down on her chest, she'd curl into herself on the couch and let the tears come. Quiet, angry tears that tasted like salt and shame. By the eighth call, Beatrice stopped answering. She blocked the number. Changed her SIM card. But somehow, Lisa always found her way back in. A new number. A new voice message. A new way to remind her that the world she'd left behind wasn't done with her yet. At first, it drained her, the constant hum of fear, the way her chest tightened every time her phone rang. But slowly, something in her shifted. She stopped reacting. Stopped letting Lisa's venom sink into her bones. The next time the phone rang, and Lisa's laugh filled the line, Beatrice let her talk. Let her brag. Let her gloat. Then she hung up and went for a walk in the park. And for the first time in months, she slept through the night. To the rest of the world, Lisa was thriving. Photos of her draped in couture at charity galas filled gossip sites. Clips of her laughing beside Alexander at board dinners played on morning shows. Magazines ran glossy spreads with headlines like Steele's stunning flame, Lisa Carter's rise to high society royalty. From mystery to power couple, Alexander Steele and Lisa Carter redefine elegance. She drank in the attention like champagne, floating through her days on the validation of strangers. And when the cameras weren't flashing, she practiced her smile in the mirror, perfecting the angle, the tilt of her chin, the exact curve of her lips. What she didn't notice, or refused to, was the way Alexander's hand no longer lingered when it rested at her back. The way his gaze slid past her when she spoke. The way the quiet between them grew heavier with each passing day. Because for Lisa, as long as the world still envied her, the rest didn't matter. In her little apartment, Beatrice found herself again. She learned to love mornings, the quiet stillness before the city stirred. She learned to love her work, the customers who smiled at her recommendations, the kids who begged for story time in the children's section. She learned to love evenings filled with paperbacks and soft music, with phone calls to her mother that always ended in laughter instead of tears. And slowly, she started to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have a life that wasn't defined by what she'd lost. Not perfect. Not glamorous. But hers. It started with a mistake Lisa didn't see coming. A transfer that shouldn't have been flagged. A discrepancy in the foundation's accounts that made Alexander pause. At first, he brushed it off, a clerical error, an oversight. But then another appeared. And another. And soon, quiet suspicion began to take root. To the rest of the world, Lisa Carter was untouchable. Every glossy magazine cover, every social post, every paparazzi shot screamed the same thing: she had won. She'd step out of black cars in designer gowns, chin tilted just so, the flash of cameras catching the diamonds at her throat. She'd glide through gala doors with her hand looped through Alexander Steele's arm, smiling that sharp little smile that said I belong here. Steele and Carter, the power couple of the year. From small town to society darling, Lisa Carter redefines the game. And Lisa drank it all in like champagne. Every headline was validation. Every whisper of envy from women who'd once ignored her was proof that she'd built herself into someone worth wanting. She told herself that the quiet between her and Alexander, the way his gaze had grown cooler, the way his touch had become perfunctory, was just him. That he was a man of distance, a man who didn't do softness. She told herself a lot of things. Because the alternative, that he was slipping away, was unthinkable. It started, as these things often do, with numbers. Alexander never micromanaged the Steele Foundation. There were accountants and directors for that. People he trusted. People paid to keep the machine running. But that morning, while reviewing quarterly reports, one entry caught his attention. $75,000 for event coordination. Except there hadn't been an event. He flagged it to the finance director. The response was quick and polite, an oversight, they said. A clerical error. He accepted that. For the moment. Until 2 weeks later, another report landed in his inbox. This time, $120,000 under travel expenses. And he hadn't traveled anywhere. Then came the murmurs. A conversation in the kitchen, hushed voices carrying when they shouldn't have. A glance from Elena, quick and sharp, before she masked it with a professional smile. Finally, one evening, as she handed him his itinerary for the week, Elena hesitated. "Sir," she said, her tone careful, respectful. I don't mean to overstep. But you might want to take a closer look at some of the accounts." Alexander stilled. "Why?" Her eyes lowered. "Because Miss Carter has been moving differently." That phrase lodged itself in his chest like a splinter. He didn't confront Lisa. Not yet. Instead, Alexander did what he had built his empire on, he observed. Quietly. Carefully. He rerouted all Foundation reports to his private email. He made calls, quiet and precise, to people who owed him favors. And, finally, he hired someone. Not one of the men everyone in the city knew worked for him, but a private investigator with no ties to his world. "Follow the money," he said. "And follow her." It took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of patience, of silence, of carefully masking the storm building under his skin every time Lisa smiled at him like he was a fool. And then the reports started coming in. First, the paper trail. Wire transfers to an untraceable account in Lisa's name. Foundation funds funneled into expenses that never existed. Private shopping sprees disguised as charity outreach. Then, the movements. Meetings in quiet restaurants with people she swore she didn't know. Whispered conversations in corners of bars where no cameras reached. And then, the recording. Lisa, sitting in a booth, her voice sharp and cruel, spilling poison into her phone. "She thinks she's free of me," Lisa said, laughing. "But she'll never be free. And him? He's too stupid to ever see through me. I made sure of that." Alexander listened to that recording 3 times. Once as disbelief. Once as rage. And once in a silence so heavy it felt like the walls of his study were closing in on him. Then he poured a drink he didn't touch and sat there, staring at nothing, as the weight of everything settled like lead in his chest. Her betrayal didn't even sting. Not really. What gutted him was Beatrice. Beatrice, with her quiet dignity and her soft voice. Beatrice, who had looked him in the eye through her tears and told him she didn't want his money, only for him to cut her down with words that still echoed like gunfire. Beatrice, who had begged him to believe her. And he hadn't. He'd thrown her away. Because Lisa had told him to. Sleep didn't come that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her. Standing in the doorway that last morning, her suitcase at her side, her chin trembling but high. She hadn't begged him to let her stay. Hadn't cursed him or screamed. She just left. And that dignity, that grace, was what haunted him now. By morning, his mind was made up. He didn't confront Lisa. Didn't throw her out. Didn't let her see the storm she had stirred awake. Instead, he picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in almost a year. The quiet little bar on the corner of a quiet street in a quiet town, the place where a tired young woman had once sat alone and unknowingly set his life on a new course. "Do you know where she is?" Alexander asked, his voice rough. The pause on the other end stretched too long. "She's here," the bartender said finally, cautious. "But, maybe you should ask yourself if she wants to see you." "I don't care what she wants," Alexander said, his tone sharp. Then softer, rawer, I need to make this right." Lisa didn't notice. Or maybe she didn't want to. When Alexander told her he had to handle business out of town, she didn't question it. Why would she? In her mind, she had him exactly where she wanted him. She spent the afternoon shopping for a dress for the upcoming gala, smiling at her reflection in every boutique mirror, imagining how the cameras would flash when she stepped out of the car. That night, she texted him a photo. A perfectly staged shot of herself in silk and diamonds, captioned, "Missing you, baby." Alexander didn't reply. And Lisa never saw the plane leave the private hangar, bound for the quiet little town where the only person who had ever loved him without an agenda had been living her life, far away from his chaos. The town was smaller than Alexander remembered, or maybe it just felt that way because the chaos he carried inside him made everything else seem still. As the car rolled slowly through the narrow streets, he noticed details he'd never cared to look at before: the faded brick storefronts, the old man sweeping the sidewalk in front of the hardware store, the park bench where two kids sat sharing a milkshake. Normal. Ordinary. The kind of life Beatrice had always deserved. His driver slowed to a stop in front of the bar, the same one where they'd first met. Alexander sat there for a long moment, hands clenched around the leather gloves in his lap, before finally stepping out into the crisp evening air. The bartender was behind the counter, wiping down a glass. He looked up, eyes narrowing slightly. "You," he said flatly. "Me," Alexander replied, his voice quiet. The man set the glass down. "She doesn't want to see you." "I know," Alexander said. And God, did he know? "But I need to see her." She didn't see him at first. Beatrice was behind the counter of the little bookstore 2 streets over, her hair tied up in a loose bun, a soft sweater hanging off one shoulder. She was helping an older woman pick out a novel, her smile small but warm, her voice gentle. For a moment, Alexander just watched. It hit him then, how different she looked. Not glamorous, not polished to perfection like she had been in his world, but real. Soft. Beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with labels or headlines. And then she looked up. Her eyes met his across the shop. The book in her hand slipped. She didn't say his name. Didn't even move. Alexander took one careful step forward. "Beatrice." "Don't," she said sharply, her voice steady but her hands trembling where they rested on the counter. He stopped, the word cutting through the air like a blade. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said quietly. "You already did," she replied, her eyes dark and unreadable. "You don't get to show up here like nothing happened." "I know," he admitted. "And I'm not asking you to forget. He hesitated, the weight of his own guilt pressing heavy against his chest. "I need to make things right." Beatrice laughed then, a bitter, humorless sound. "Make things right? You threw me away, Alexander. You believed her over me. You let her ruin me, and now what? You think you can fix it with an apology?" Her voice cracked on that last word, and it gutted him. No, he said, his own voice rough. I don't think an apology is enough. But I'm still here. Begging for the chance to try. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, Alexander reached into his coat and pulled out a small folder. He laid it gently on the counter between them, the edges of the paper sharp against the wood. This is everything, he said quietly. Every transfer. Every lie. Every whisper she planted to turn me against you. I know now. I know the truth. And I hate myself for not seeing it sooner. Beatrice stared at the folder but didn't touch it. Her jaw tightened, her chest rising and falling in sharp, shallow breaths. You should go, she said finally, her voice soft but steady. Beatrice. Please, she whispered. Just go. But Alexander didn't leave. For the next week, he came back. Not every day, not enough to overwhelm her, but enough to show her that he wasn't giving up. He'd sit quietly at a table in the corner of the bookstore, a coffee cooling beside him, pretending to read while his eyes followed her around the shop. Sometimes he'd leave flowers on the counter before walking out without a word. Sometimes he'd just sit there, silent, steady, waiting. And slowly, painfully slowly, the ice began to crack. It was a rainy Thursday when she finally spoke to him. You don't get to just sit there, Beatrice said, her voice quiet but firm as she wiped down the counter. Why are you here? Alexander looked up, his pale gray eyes tired but steady. Because I can't let the last thing between us be a lie, he said simply. She shook her head. You think showing up here changes anything? It doesn't. You destroyed me, Alexander. Do you understand that? You broke me in ways I didn't even know I could break. His throat tightened. I know. And I'll never forgive myself for it. But I'm not asking you to forgive me today. I'm just asking you to let me prove I'm not the man I was when I let her win. Something in his voice, raw, unguarded, made her chest ache, but she forced herself to look away. You should hate me, he said softly. I wouldn't blame you if you did. But Beatrice. I love you. I never stopped. She didn't answer. Not that day. But she didn't send him away, either. And when he came back the next morning, the bell above the door chiming softly as he stepped inside, she didn't turn her back. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something. Days turned into weeks, and Alexander kept showing up. Not in the grand, sweeping gestures that used to define his world, but in quiet, steady ways. Picking up his coffee from the same corner cafe where she went every morning, always leaving before she arrived but making sure the barista remembered her usual order. Buying books he clearly didn't plan to read, just to have an excuse to stand in her store and see her. Leaving small, thoughtful things, a new journal with her name embossed in gold, a box of her favorite tea, on the counter without a note, as if the gesture alone had to speak for him. At first, Beatrice pretended not to notice. She told herself his presence didn't matter, that she could live her life and ignore the man who had once broken her. But late at night, in her quiet apartment, she caught herself tracing her fingers over the edges of the journal, inhaling the soft floral scent of the tea he'd left. And that scared her more than she wanted to admit. It was a Wednesday afternoon, the rain steady against the windows of the bookstore, when she finally broke the silence. You don't get to keep doing this, Beatrice said, her voice sharp but trembling. Alexander set down the book in his hand and met her gaze. Doing what? Being here, she whispered. Sitting there every day like you didn't ruin me. Like you didn't stand by while she tore my life apart. He didn't flinch. I know what I did, he said softly. And I hate myself for it. Every single day. But I also know what I feel, and I can't walk away without trying to show you that I'm not the man I was then. Beatrice's throat tightened. You believed her over me. You looked me in the eye and called me a liar. You threw me out like I was nothing. His voice cracked. You were never nothing to me, Beatrice. You are everything. I was blind, and I let her poison my mind. But the moment I saw the truth, the moment I heard her say it in her own words, I knew. And I knew I had to find you. Tears burned her eyes, but she blinked them away, her voice steady even as it broke. And what if I don't want to be found? His jaw tightened, pain flickering across his features. Then I'll walk away, he said quietly. If that's what you want, I'll never come back. But I needed you to know that I see you now. That I know what I lost. And that I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel that kind of pain again, if you'll let me. The bookstore was quiet except for the steady patter of rain and the soft hum of her heartbeat in her ears. For the first time in almost a year, Beatrice didn't feel anger when she looked at him. Just a deep, aching sadness for everything they'd lost. The next morning, she found a paper cup on the counter when she opened the store. Her coffee. Perfectly made. No note. No name. Just the quiet gesture. And for the first time, Beatrice let herself smile. It started small. A soft, thank you, when he held the door open for her. A quiet conversation about the weather as he walked her to her car. A shared laugh over a book recommendation he'd clearly Googled just to have something to talk about. Little by little, the wall between them began to crack. One evening, when the store was empty and the sky outside was streaked with gold, she handed him a book. You might actually like this one, she said, her voice softer than it had been in months. He didn't take it at first, his pale gray eyes searching hers for permission. When she nodded, he finally reached for it, his fingers brushing hers. The touch sent a jolt through her chest that she couldn't quite explain. A week later, he asked if he could take her to dinner. Not fancy, he said quickly, when she hesitated. Just, a place to talk. To explain everything. No pressure. She wanted to say no. She wanted to protect the fragile peace she'd built. But when she looked at him, really looked, she saw the sincerity in his eyes. The quiet, unguarded pain of a man who had finally understood the depth of what he'd broken. So she said yes. The dinner was quiet, almost awkward at first. But then he started to talk, not like the polished man the world saw, but like someone who had finally dropped the armor he'd worn his whole life. He told her about the investigation, about the evidence, about the recording that had gutted him. He told her about the nights he'd spent awake, hating himself, replaying every word he'd said to her. And finally, he told her the truth he'd never been able to say out loud before. I love you, Beatrice. I loved you then, and I love you now. And if you let me, I'll spend the rest of my life proving it to you. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, quietly, I don't know if I can trust you again. His eyes softened, his voice steady. Then let me earn it. Every day. For as long as it takes. Over the next few weeks, they rebuilt something fragile but real. Walks in the park. Quiet dinners. Long conversations that stretched late into the night. And for the first time in a long time, Beatrice felt something she hadn't dared to feel in months, hope. But they kept it quiet. No public outings, no photographs, no whispers for Lisa to hear. Because Alexander knew, and Beatrice agreed, that when the truth finally came out, it had to be on their terms. Lisa had been floating for days. Every call from the press, every headline whispering about an imminent engagement, every jealous look from the women who'd once ignored her, it was like oxygen. Alex has a surprise for me, she said into her phone, pacing her penthouse in a silk robe while her assistant zipped dresses into garment bags. He didn't say it, but I know. This is it. The ring. The wedding. Everything I've earned. She said it like a queen claiming her throne. And the world believed her. Is a Steele wedding on the horizon? Lisa Carter spotted jewelry shopping, engagement rumors heat up. She couldn't wait to see the look on Beatrice's face when the news broke. The invitation had been for a private celebration. Lisa thought nothing of it, another gala, another opportunity for the world to photograph her draped on his arm, the envy of anyone who dared to look. She arrived in silver. A gown that clung to her curves, glittering under the crystal chandeliers. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor as she stepped into the grand hall, her smile sharp and triumphant. "Alex," she called, her voice pitched to Carrie. And then she saw her. Beatrice. Standing there in a soft, elegant dress, her hair swept into a low chignon, her posture calm and steady. For a moment, Lisa couldn't breathe. "What the hell is she doing here?" she spat, the edge in her voice slicing through the polite murmur of the crowd. Heads turned. Whispers rippled like water. Alexander stepped forward from the edge of the room, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his pale gray eyes locked on Beatrice. Lisa blinked, confusion giving way to anger. "Alex," she said, her laugh brittle. "What is this? Some kind of joke?" "No," he said evenly, his voice steady, cold. "This isn't a joke." Lisa's heels clacked as she stalked toward him, fury tightening her face. "You brought her here? After everything I've done for you? After the way I've been there for you when no one else was?" Alexander didn't flinch. "Everything you've done," he said, his voice slicing through the room like a blade, "was for you. The lies. The manipulation. The money you stole. The way you made her life hell just to feed your own ego. All of it, for you." A stunned silence fell. Lisa's face drained of color. "That's not true," she stammered, forcing a laugh that sounded more like a plea. "Baby, you know me. You know I'd never." From the side of the room, the private investigator stepped forward, a sleek folder in his hand. Alexander didn't take his eyes off her as the man opened it, pulling out sheets of paper and laying them neatly on the table. "Every transfer," Alexander said, his tone still steady. "Every forged invoice. Every time you used the foundation to pay for your greed. And every whisper you planted to turn me against the only woman who ever loved me without wanting anything in return." And then came the recording. Lisa's voice, sharp and cruel, filled the room. "She thinks she's free of me. But she'll never be free. And him? He's too stupid to ever see through me. I made sure of that." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Lisa's hands shook. "You," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You set me up." "No," Alexander said coldly. "You set yourself up." Then, as if Lisa no longer existed, Alexander turned. His gaze softened when it landed on Beatrice, and for a moment, the chaos around them fell away. He walked toward her slowly, every step deliberate, until he stood just in front of her. The room held its breath. "Beatrice," he said, his voice low but clear, carrying across the hall. "I have spent every day since losing you trying to find the right words. And I realized there aren't any. Nothing I can say will undo the way I hurt you. Nothing will erase the nights you spent thinking you weren't enough. But I need you to know this: I see you. I love you. And I will spend the rest of my life proving it if you'll let me." And then, in front of the cameras, the guests, the whispers that would soon flood every corner of the city, Alexander Steele, the man who once thought vulnerability was weakness, dropped to one knee. He opened the box. The ring wasn't gaudy or showy. It was simple. Elegant. Perfect. "Marry me," he said, his voice trembling just enough for her to hear it. "Not for the world. Not for the headlines. Just for us. Please, Beatrice. Let me come home to you." Lisa snapped. "This is a joke," she screeched, her voice wild. "You think you can humiliate me? In front of everyone? After everything I've done for you?" Security began to move, but she fought against them, her heels scraping the floor. "You'll regret this, Alex," she spat, her voice shaking. "You'll regret choosing her over me." "Get her out," Alexander said calmly, never taking his eyes off Beatrice. Lisa's screams faded as the doors closed behind her, leaving only silence. For a long, breathless moment, Beatrice just stared at him. This man. This man who had once broken her in ways she didn't know she could break. This man who had humbled himself, who had fought his own pride, who had laid himself bare before her and the entire world. Her throat tightened as tears welled in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. But Alexander heard. The relief on his face was raw, unguarded, the kind of expression that would stay with her forever. He slid the ring onto her finger with shaking hands before standing and pulling her into his arms. The room erupted, applause, cheers, the hum of cameras, but none of it mattered. For the first time in a long, long time, there was only them. Later, in the quiet of the car, Beatrice stared down at the ring on her finger. "This doesn't fix everything," she said softly. "I know," Alexander replied, his voice steady. "But it's a start. If you'll let it be." She looked up then, really looked at him, and for the first time in months, her smile reached her eyes. And in that moment, they both knew. This wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of something new. Months later, they returned to the bar where it had all started. No cameras. No headlines. Just them. Beatrice sat in her usual spot by the window, her fingers curled around a glass of iced tea, while Alexander leaned across the table, a soft smile tugging at his lips. "Do you remember what you said to me that night?" he asked. She rolled her eyes but smiled. "Something about you looking like trouble." He chuckled. "You weren't wrong." "No," she said softly, her eyes warm. "But maybe you were the kind of trouble I needed." And for the first time in a long time, Beatrice felt the peace of knowing she was exactly where she was meant to be. The house was quieter these days. Not the heavy, suffocating quiet of the mansion Beatrice had once lived in, but the soft kind, the kind filled with peace. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows of their home in the countryside, warming the polished wooden floors and the white curtains that swayed gently in the morning breeze. Beatrice stood by the kitchen island, her hair pulled into a loose braid, wearing one of Alexander's old shirts and humming softly as she stirred her tea. Behind her, footsteps padded across the floor. "You're up early," Alexander said, his voice still thick with sleep. She turned, smiling softly at the sight of him, hair mussed, t-shirt slightly wrinkled, the hard edges of the man the world knew softened in the quiet of their mornings. "You have a meeting at 9, she teased. "Someone has to make sure you don't forget." He crossed the kitchen in a few long strides, his arms sliding around her waist as he pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I could cancel it," he murmured. "Stay here with you instead." Beatrice laughed, tilting her head to look up at him. "You said that yesterday. And the day before." "And I meant it every time," he said, his pale gray eyes soft. Life had changed, but in ways that felt right. Beatrice had kept her little bookstore in the small town. It was hers, her quiet sanctuary. Sometimes Alexander would stop by in the afternoons, leaning against the shelves while she helped customers, pretending to browse but really just watching her with that soft, steady gaze that still made her stomach flutter. The world had moved on from the scandal a long time ago. Headlines had faded. Whispers had quieted. Now, when the press talked about them, it wasn't about chaos or betrayal, it was about the quiet strength of a couple who had fought their way back to each other. But to Beatrice and Alexander, none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was this, the life they'd built away from the noise. Sometimes, when she caught sight of her ring in the morning light, she'd think about the night he'd slipped it onto her finger, the way his voice had trembled when he'd said, "Marry me." Not for the world. Just for us. And every time, her chest tightened, not with pain, but with gratitude. Not because of the ring. Not because of the grand proposal or the headlines that followed. But because every single day since, he had kept that promise. As they sat together on the porch that evening, the sun dipping below the horizon in a blaze of pink and gold, Alexander reached for her hand. "Do you ever think about more?" he asked quietly, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. Beatrice glanced at him, curiosity in her eyes. "More. A family," he said simply. "Kids running through the halls. Laughter in every corner. A home that's full." Her heart fluttered at the thought. It wasn't something she'd let herself imagine before, not with him, not with anyone. But here, now, with the man who had learned how to love her the right way, it didn't feel impossible anymore. "Maybe," she said softly, a smile tugging at her lips. "Someday." Alexander's hand tightened gently around hers, his gaze steady. "Someday," he echoed. And in that moment, with the soft evening air curling around them and the quiet promise of tomorrow hanging in the space between their intertwined hands, Beatrice realized something she hadn't before. This simple, ordinary happiness, was what she had been searching for all along. Not the mansions. Not the headlines. Not the life other people thought she should want. Just love. Steady. True. Home. And finally, she had it. Love isn't about grand gestures or perfect stories, it's about choosing each other, every single day. And for Beatrice and Alexander, this was only the beginning of a lifetime of choices, made together. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share with your loved ones. And let know where in the world you're watching from. Thank you for always tuning in, it means a lot to us.